Good morning, friends, and welcome to a new episode of the LeadershIT Podcast. Today's guest, who also happens to open the first episode of this podcast's third season, is none other than Gabriella Vacca, former CTO of Sky Italia, with extensive experience as a CTO, both in Italy and in the US. She's now moved more toward advisory board roles with companies in the US and more, but she'll tell us about that herself. Welcome, Gabriella.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Luca. Thank you.
Thank you for coming to share your experience. So, Gabriella, would you tell us a bit about your journey?
Yes, certainly. I come from a very technical education, computer engineering, but I've always had a passion for ideas, for philosophy, for people, for the humanistic side. At the start of my career, those two components didn't really mix in a way that matched my own traits. But as I went on, they became increasingly aligned. That's very much my idea of modern leadership. And I started in Italy. I have experience in Italy and in France. Then I moved to the United States. This was before and during the bubble, actually a bit before the dot-com bubble in the late 90s. And from there, I continued in technical roles, moving around the US and doing a bit of everything, architect, software, and of course, managing people, budgets, and so on, both with startups and larger companies. That then led me 5 years ago to take a CTO role in Italy with Sky, which was a wonderful journey, a beautiful transformation for the company, for me personally, and for the team, etc. And now, as I mentioned, I'm transitioning into more advisory board roles in both the US and Europe. We'll see what happens. That's roughly my profile.
Of course. And Gabriella, you're undeniably a leader with tremendous leadership experience. How do you see modern leadership? How has the concept evolved over the years, and where are we now?
When I started many years ago, leadership was more traditional. Let's call it command and control. There was hierarchy, and the ability for younger people to have an impact was perhaps a bit more limited. Things have changed substantially because the world itself has changed. The complexity and diversity we now see in technology, in the situations we must solve, in geopolitics and so on, I won't list what's sadly obvious, have made it clear the modern leader must be more open to creating a true sense of team, open to taking input from anywhere in the company, from their own team, from the business, from external partners and beyond. Managing this multidimensional complexity is incredibly hard. No one can consider themselves the sole expert. So modern leadership has to be highly collaborative, very open. I call this kind of leadership network leadership, as opposed to what I call spider leadership, where the leader sits at the center and issues directions to everyone, every sub-team below. In my view, that model doesn't hold up for the reasons I just mentioned. A network organization is one where each person knows their role, knows they're part of something bigger. So purpose and how we work together become absolutely critical. In this way, the organization is much more reactive and proactive to whatever may happen. One last point. Today's workforce has dimensions very different from the past. Gen Z, a bit of everything. The topics of gender and cultural diversity are now very prominent. All these elements must be brought together into a high-performing team. That's what companies expect.
I admit that even in my relatively brief work experience, I've noticed this shift, in my view, a positive one, from a boss who gives orders to empowering employees so they themselves are accountable and understand that it's collective work. We work together and move in the same direction. What I wanted to ask is how you dealt with this change in your career. As a leader, how did you handle this paradigm shift from issuing directions to having this more networked approach, as you called it?
There were 2 or 3 key things in my career. The first is that, especially when I went to the US, with my technical background and my passion for concepts, for people, for the more humanistic side, at the beginning I was a bit of what they call an odd piece of furniture, something you put in your house because you like it and it's a conversation piece. But when you sell the house, you hide it because you don't know if others will like it. So there's a risk. I was always a bit like that. My way of speaking was different, besides the accent I had when I first moved to the US. And my way of managing things was different from what I saw around me. The way I worked with people, earlier you used the word empowered. What I do goes beyond empowerment. It's believing you can make a difference and inspiring that sense of confidence. That way, you don't just feel empowered, you give your best, and you also take risks. I kept working like that partly because it was in my nature, and then I saw it worked with people, for me, for internal and external partners. So I continued. What happened is that at the beginning, topics like human leadership, principles and values, a sense of purpose, company culture, people didn't talk much about them. But maybe about 10 years ago, this started to take shape. That was a confirmation that my way of managing things, processes, and people was not only right in my view, but also something many people and companies began to see value in. So it was a personal transformation, a group leadership evolution, and a reflection of how the corporate and tech world is transforming. It's a beautiful thing.
Yes, absolutely. It's much more fulfilling for an employee to have that sense of confidence. On that note, how do you instill that you can do it confidence in employees?
First of all, I've never had the arrogance to think that company strategy or technology was solely my responsibility. There are people whose subject matter expertise is deeper than mine, and they absolutely must be valued. Second, my role was different. Not to always make the right decisions for every technology under my remit, but to put guardrails in place, to give guidance on why one thing is more important than another. So my work has always been to define and to facilitate, to make sure all the input coming from people with more subject matter expertise was blended into a company strategy. I've rarely had to exercise authority. It happened only a couple of times in 5 years at Sky. When a decision couldn't be reached, I said, okay, I'll make it. And then we'll analyze why this might or might not work. So, a bit of humility, accepting you can't know everything and can't be the best at everything. You should position yourself. Yes, there's an element of servant leadership here. That's one thing. Second is what in America they call hands off the wheel, meaning driving without your hands on the steering wheel. I gave a talk in June and spoke about Star Wars with Luke using the Force. He doesn't keep his hands on the wheel. It's not command and control. I must control everything. He uses a different dimension. In leadership, that force means understanding the elements that are changing in the technological world, understanding the value, transmitting curiosity, and the need for change to people, and making sure everyone with their own subject matter expertise has a way to contribute to the bigger picture, always with a very clear sense of direction and purpose. Third, I've always tried to bring clarity. Organizations are often a bit confused. What needs to be done isn't clear. That lack of clarity, especially at the leadership level, creates a ripple effect through the organization. If something isn't crystal clear to you, imagine the people 3 or 4 levels away. So bringing clarity, even simply saying, this part is clear. This part is not yet clear, but we'll clarify it within 2 weeks. So please be patient or help us clarify becomes very important. So I'd say the 3 things are humility, hands off the wheel, and bringing clarity.
Speaking of your overall approach and going back to what you said earlier, that when you arrived in America, you did things differently. What were the biggest challenges you faced in bringing this different style into companies?
When I returned to Italy, well, I spent 5 years in a wonderful company, very open, already international, with people who wanted to do things and change things. They were curious about this somewhat different leadership style compared to what they were used to. So I found an open company. And not only that, the entire tech ecosystem in Italy, the partner companies, which I won't name out of respect, with all of them, I found people eager to work hard and to contribute. It was A very open environment, one where we also wanted to talk about problems, not just celebrate wins. I also found an environment far more interested in the why than the what. That had been my bet in America. At first, not fully understood. But over time, the groups I worked with in the US and we evolved together. Being interested in why we do something before how we do it is crucial. It's also a way to read the culture, the company culture, and people's readiness. When you care about the why, it means you're willing to take responsibility. It means you have space to find solutions related to your competencies within the mission, right? So clarity on why we're doing something. What's the value for the user? What's the value for us? What are we learning? How are we building our resume while doing it? This is an important motivator. The sense of, I'm learning again, right? All these elements make teams work a bit differently. These are things aligned with what I wanted to do in the US and managed to do. And in Italy, I found an ecosystem that was absolutely fertile in this sense. Fertile. That's exactly the right word.
Fantastic. And have there been times when this leadership approach caused issues or didn't go entirely smoothly?
Yes, of course. Sometimes when an organization is used to command and control, these more, let's call them modern leadership models, can be perceived as weak. That's a problem, because if people think the strategy isn't defined enough or that everyone can do whatever they want, there's a risk of implosion. So you have to talk about it, and you must make the framework clear, what I call freedom within a framework. If this is what we have to do, this is how we'll do it at a macro level. Your space, your freedom is within this area, not elsewhere. There were a couple of cases, Gilmont, where people had to learn the hard way, that decisions made alone and not in sync with the group might not be best for the group. Sometimes you can give people time to understand group dynamics for themselves. Other times you need very direct conversations and to point out, this is the framework we work in. If it doesn't work for you, we'll find another solution. People who've worked with me will tell you that on one hand, I'm very supportive, but on the other, I can have very direct conversations that are still productive because they know my motivation isn't about authority or personal power. It's always about making things work well for the company and its people. There's always good intent. We might have different opinions about the method, but there's good intent on both sides. You have to start from that principle. Otherwise, you risk using a communication style that isn't appropriate for people who, at that moment, may need a very direct conversation. I do the best I can.
Sure. Earlier, you raised an interesting point about clarity, bringing clarity. In your view, what's the most effective way to do that?
First, try to understand things from above, the helicopter view. Why are we doing something? Directions from the CEO and so on always have motivations, sometimes well-defined, other times less so. Because when you start a journey, let's use an analogy. You want to cross a forest, something you've never done before. Clarity is limited. You're prepared. You know you have to get from point A to point B, but you've never traveled that path. So you need to provide a solid narrative, a good storytelling about this adventure. Like the pioneers heading west a long time ago. They had a destination, but everything else had to be figured out. Even saying, this is what we know. This is what we don't know. And we'll define it as we go. That is perhaps less about clarity and more about respect for people. I'm not kidding you. I'm telling you why we have to do it. And I'm adding a narrative, the gold rush of the pioneers, right? Unfortunately, very few actually struck it rich, but the carrot turn was compelling. So let's build a narrative with a strong carrot. Be very respectful in stating what we know and what we don't know. Be open. because when you head west, you don't have all the skills you need. That's why pioneers traveled in groups. Someone was better at one thing than another. Today, that's like traveling with the doctor, the technology expert, logistics, and so on. So clarity and openness to input from the group undergoing the transformation are critical. I love using analogies and metaphors because many people can visualize them. They speak more to the heart than to the head. Instead of showing a technical architecture plan that means nothing to many, metaphors also help business people lean into the tech topics. I'm very proud that at Sky, in the tough post-COVID situation, leadership approved a very large program to transform the CRM stack. They could have said no, but we presented it well, and it was clear without this transformation, we couldn't launch new products and services. The company would struggle with agility, so the company decided first to trust us with the execution. And second, we helped them see that without this investment, the company would face serious agility problems in defining new products and services. That's a good example of transformations and narrative.
Thank you. Super interesting. I'll close with a question I think you're perfect to answer, given your vast experience. How do you see the future evolution of leadership?
I see it in line with what we've discussed, maintaining this element of modernity and openness. Two things need to happen, and you'll notice my bias here. First, diversity. The more diverse a team is, in gender, in opinions, in culture, and so on, the stronger it is. I've seen this so many times. Beyond being stronger, it's more interesting, more enjoyable. Conversations are more varied, and they reflect society and our customers. That's one. Second, in this context, the newer generations have ways of working and thinking, truly different from those older than them, like me. I have two kids, 24 and almost 27. Their paths are much less linear than mine. They're much more interested in things around their work, very interested in the why of what we do in a company, unlike many from my generation. I think this intergenerational way of working is an incredible richness. It's not just that everyone gains value. Together we create something new, in a way different from before. So, modern leadership must increasingly integrate this broad diversity we now have. In my opinion, that makes the work of leaders incredibly interesting.
I fully share this vision. And for anyone who missed last season's final episode, I recommend listening to it. We tackled exactly this so-called issue we sometimes have with diversity in the tech world with Mara Marzocchi, co-founder of Codemotion. Go check it out. There are tons of interesting insights.
Yes, great.
Gabriella, thank you so much for taking part in this project.